benefit of your people and be done in your name. These mercies I ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Member Green. Apologies for absence. Any apologies, Miss? Okay. I understand Member Lisa Anna is on her way. First of all, I want to apologize for my own lateness. I got caught in some exigencies on the way here, and the traffic never assisted at all. I won't go into the reasons for the traffic being as it is, but be it as it may, it compounded a bad situation. So my apologies are in order to my colleague members and, of course, other stakeholders, the media, and others who gathered on time for the proceedings. Members, we have a few housekeeping matters to deal with. As you all are aware, our meeting was rescheduled from last week to accommodate the PAAC taking the supplementary budget, and that put us off a little bit. I must say, on your behalf, I conveyed our acceptance of the meeting being rescheduled. I don't think I have any opposition to that action on behalf of the committee. During the course of last week, I think the secretary to the committee had circulated our responses to some groups appearing before us to give with the state of emergency, and we dealt with the commissioner and the JDF, commissioner of police and the chief of staff, and we had agreed to hear from the various related stakeholder groups, and we also decided that any addition we would send them on to the clerk for decision, collective decision. I know a round robin was attempted, but I don't think it was concluded as to the additional groups that we would call before. So I want to settle that this morning so that the notice can be sent out.
I already written to those groups that we agreed to, but it is for these.
Yes. I'm advised the ones we had agreed to have already been notified, which includes, well, the additional ones that were put forward, 6 of them, and it is for us to agree on them. 1, the public defender; 2, commanding officers of St. James and St. Catherine, and the municipalities or municipal corporations of St. James and St. Catherine, Peace Management Initiative, and the Violence Prevention Alliance. Those were the ones that were submitted by various members through the email. My own response, members, was that I never felt that the local, the parish councils, parish municipalities would necessarily be pertinent. But as per the discussion we had, we would stick to the stakeholder groups that deal with the consequences and impact of the activities. But those were my thoughts. So I'm throwing it out now for us to decide which of the 6 or if all of them that we would call. Members?
Chair, you remember in that meeting I had raised a point which is captured in the minutes, that I believe that the approach that should be taken in relation to the groups is that a list should be compiled and circulated, and then the members indicate whether they are minded to have that group sit. I think it is important, Chair, that in all of these decisions we are proceeding in keeping with the various rubrics laid down regarding the running of the committee, and in that these decisions should proceed by way of majority decision. And I believe that, as was done in Parliament on Tuesday in relation to what I see are now being termed as the additional groups. I really believe that that should be done in relation to all groups to see if there is agreement that those groups are in fact required by the majority to sit.
May I say, Member Green, that those that were agreed on by the committee. Those were not individually agreed to. The committee at the time decided on those. We never decided on the additional ones to them. But just to reemphasize, it was the committee who made that decision.
Well, I hear you, Chair.
It's a matter of fact and record.
I was here. I made my point. I thought that was the direction in which we were going to move. I never thought that in speaking about the possible groups, it would be in opposition to it being sent out. I truly thought that we were taking suggestions that would then be circulated. I never know that we were determining then and there that those would be those groups.
Okay, we are here now, so we can just. So let me just again invite members to indicate any, some, or all of the 6 that have been put forward by us through the email.
But Chair, what was circulated in Parliament? There was something passed around in Parliament yesterday where persons indicated whether they were.
Yeah, we're overriding that and just make the decision here.
No, Chair, why would we, Chair?
No, sorry. Maybe I wait you. I misunderstood you. I'm thinking you were referring to the list that was passed around of individual groups. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, I'm saying in Parliament on Tuesday, a list was circulated indicating that to the members of the committee that they should indicate of the list if they would want to see. And well, I responded. I'm sure members responded. So I'm saying, why would we bypass that process that has already taken place?
Well, I'm not sure that was universal. I can't recall seeing that list. But if we're here now in committee and it still isn't,
yeah,
I mean, why go back to the list that may have been circulated to a few members? We're all here, so can we?
You know what I like about that approach, Chair, is that you can clearly see what is determined. In other words, again, if you want to do it here, but I would like an approach that there is no doubt, as I had the last time.
No, I don't want to belabor the point. But remember, the reason why we had decided on the round robin is because we didn't want to detain the meeting in the discussion the last time to decide. So we deferred it and say when we would have left, we can convey our preferences only because we didn't want to detain the proceedings the last time. But we are here now. We are the same persons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it is for one of the reasons that I continue to argue the point that we need to move away from customs and precedents because it's getting us into trouble. Because I signed a document asking me for a decision as to where my mindset would have been, and it came under the signature of Chesan. The same document that was passed around in Parliament on Tuesday. So I see that document as a document that is formalized and authorized.
Well,
so today now to hear that we are going to forego that document to look at something else, it not sending the right message.
I don't think it's a controversy. What do you propose that we do now?
Yes, it becomes a controversy, sir, because I want to stand by my signature there and not to. What if I wasn't here this morning? I couldn't come into to town on time because I'm coming all the way from country, right? You would have said to me, no, that I did not have a vote.
Can we decide on one?
we must make a decision now. Let me hear what you propose for us to do.
If we have the document, Chair, and if you have people who never signed, then circulate it for
My information is that the document can't be found. That's what I'm being advised.
No, Mr. Chairman, I am not going to, I don't want to accept it, and I'm going to be very strong about it. It can't be that that piece of document cannot be found.
Well, I don't know to answer you. I don't know.
You notice member Bunting is laughing about it because he realizes it's a joke. Him know it's a joke.
No, that's not what I'm laughing. No, I beg you don't impute any motive. No, I beg you don't impute any motive. Don't impute any motive. What I am laughing about is this sort of using this procedural device to just delay the proceedings of the committee. We're all here.
No.
If any round robin is only effective if it's unanimous. It didn't come to all members, so it can't be, we never saw it, so it can't be a unanimous round robin resolution. We're here now in committee. Anybody who doesn't come to committee, well, they don't have a say if they're not here.
Well,
that's
sure.
just a feature of it. But this is just a device to delay and prevent the committee from getting on to the business of the day. And that's perhaps why things like the standing orders, prohibit ministers from sitting on these committees, because they come here to defend the executive rather than to allow the proper parliamentary oversight of the executive. And what we're seeing here is this morning is just procedural delay to prevent us from getting on with the business of the committee. That's why I was laughing.
Chair, the member has a way to impute motive, which and you said don't do it. So then don't do the same thing that you complain of. Chair, for the good functioning and proper running of any of these committees, matters have to be done in a certain manner. I think we all agree. The Ministry of National Security came, we had our questions, we made our points. That is separate. All we're saying is that an approach was taken. Why would that approach now be abandoned? And why would we say that that approach doesn't have the strength of the committee? When a document was distributed indicating that you should indicate in Parliament whether you wanted these persons to attend. And if the document cannot be found, but I'm sure a record has been taken.
Members, as a matter of record, the Secretary is advising that the document that went in circulation through the orderly cannot be found, and hence we cannot proceed with it. Are you saying that the committee then come to a standstill because that document can't be found for the members to indicate what are the entities to be called here? Come on, members. We are here. Mike.
Sorry to be late, Chairman. I deeply apologize to the members who are on time due to the traffic. I am formally moving that we proceed with today's activity. We have invited the FLA and MOCA to be here. They're outside. I am formally moving that we proceed to invite them in.
And I second that motion.
Okay, we all agree? We proceed. Any objection?
Chair, I want to raise another point.
No, before we go to the other point, we agree we are going to proceed with the agencies that are before us?
No, that is the point that I'm going to.
So it's the same point?
It's the same point.
Oh.
Guidance has come in relation to the operation of these committees, Chair, which I think is very important. The guidance has said that if a matter isn't referred from the House to the committee, then for the committee to proceed with treating with the matter, then the committee has to have agreement from a majority of its members in relation to what is to be treated with. That guidance has come from the clerk. I am not sure, I will say I was not at the initial meeting. My apology was noted. but I have seen nowhere that the agenda of the committee has been agreed upon by the majority of the members of the committee. And I made
Mr.
that
Chairman,
point,
can I
Chair,
move that the committee vote on the agenda?
No, member, I have to intervene here. The agenda that is before us was decided by the committee at the first meeting when it reconvened. That was the decision of the committee. The agencies, entities that are before us, that are to be seen, were decided upon by the committee.
Chair, I made a specific point that was made. Was it decided upon by the majority of the members of the committee? And if so, I would love to see an indication of same.
I can ask the secretary to revert to the minutes that reflected that decision of the committee. In the meantime,
And Chair, I would just make another point. And, you know, my interpretation is not majority of members at the meeting. It says a majority of members of the committee. For other clauses in relation to Parliament, a majority means 50 plus 1, and I would and Chair, you know why this is important and why I have seen you try to disregard the initial pass around that went around. The reason why these things are taken, the reasons why these things are taken in writing is so that the committee can indicate that they have the required majority to treat with the matter. And I'm saying, Chair, if you're unable to indicate that, then the agenda could not go forward as proposed.
Mr. Chairman, with respect, a majority of the committee means the committee present. On constitutional matters, it specifically then says a committee of the entire House, where yes, even the Speaker has an originating vote. I mean, this is just a transparent attempt to prevent oversight of the FLA by this committee. That was obvious from the email exchanges that we saw before the committee came here. And Mr. Chairman, if there is any doubt, put it to the vote now. Put the agenda to the vote and let us
members,
vote
the agenda before us this morning,
each of us
I am now going to put to a vote that we proceed with the agencies MOCA and the FLA at this morning's meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Speak up. 2 against and 4 for. We proceed. Okay, members. We will could the orderly invite in both agencies. We will take them in the order of the FLA and MOCA and see how we proceed. Let me welcome representatives of the Ministry of National Security, Permanent Secretary and her team, and the leaders of both MOCA. As is customary, I'm going to ask each to introduce yourself and members of your respective teams, but let me just generally welcome you all and to apologize for our late start this morning, kind of a difficult situation that arose for some of us. But we apologize profusely for that delay. We had some internal matters in the committee to deal with, hence our further delay in inviting you in to the proceedings. So Madam Pierce, who is now an honorary member of the Parliament.
Thank you very much, sir. Good morning to you, Chair and members. This morning we have in-house with me the head of MOCA and his team, Colonel Desmond Edwards, and Mr. Nigel Park, his senior legal officer, Mr. Shane Dallin, CEO of FLA, and he has his team, Ms. Latine Allen is the Director of Special Projects, Mr. Halim Anderson, Director of Finance and Administration, Ms. Deidre Mullings, Director of Application and Certification, Mr. Cleveland Crooks, Director of Compliance and Enforcement, and Ms. Kemoy Gaynor, Director of Client Relations. And from the Ministry Central, Ms. Paula Wadsworth, Senior Legal Officer, Mr. Delroy Simpson, who is Head of Corporate Services, and Mr. Paul Henry, who is the Acting Director of Protective Security, and myself, PS. As usual, I'd like to make a few comments. I don't know if you'd like me to move straight into it.
Sure, Madam Pierce.
Okay.
I was about to say sure, member.
Okay, so let me start by acknowledging the combined efforts of the FLA and MOCA in seeking to strengthen the administrative and governance arrangements surrounding the issuance of firearms and other related services. And to this end, we can report that already steady progress has been made in addressing some of the challenges impacting the FLA. As PS, it is my remit to provide the policy framework and policy implementation support, which will give effect to improve service delivery where these entities are concerned. So a few points I wanted to raise here, acknowledging that a policy decision was made to establish MOCA as an independent law enforcement agency, focusing primarily on major organized crime and corruption. And I'm pleased to inform the committee, as you know, and the general public, that MOCA Act has been passed and consultations are ongoing with the Ministry of Finance and Planning with a view to finalizing the establishment and structure of the agency. And we anticipate that this will be completed in time for April 1, 2019. However, pending the approval of the agency structure and establishment, the agency will continue to draw on support from the other two main law enforcement entities, JCF and JDF. All costs regarding the employment and retention of non-law enforcement personnel are borne directly by the Ministry of National Security, and the goal is to establish a budget in the 1920 financial year to coincide with the establishment of the entity for funding its operations. I also want to acknowledge the work and support of the Ministry of Finance and Planning in helping to give effect to the establishment of MOCA in keeping with the policy decision of the government. Also noting the ministry's work with the Firearms FLA, ensuring that firearms proliferation does not threaten public safety. We are moving and leading on the review of the Firearms Act with a goal of addressing any gaps in the legislation and establishing more stringent controls. And we're moving to reduce the levels of individual importation of firearms. Arising from the challenges at FLA, the ministry had conducted a comprehensive review of the entity's systems and procedures. Policy gaps were identified and a number of key recommendations made to strengthen the governance arrangements. For instance, the focus was shifted toward ramping up the collection of ballistic signatures in respect of weapons for which licenses are issued. And I'm pleased to report that over 7,000 signatures have been completed to date. We have also seen the integration of the ASICUDA network that automates and enhances record keeping and information management for all imports and exports of firearms and ammunition. And this is to focus on ammunition. This to focus on ammunition to cause reconciliation of ammo from point of international purchase to discharge of rounds. We are moving towards greater accountability in issuance of firearm license through the rigorous review and implementation of governance systems and processes. And so administrative controls and systems are being put in place and are being strengthened. So today the respective heads are here and will respond to specific questions related to the operational aspects of their portfolio. And this is where I will now stop and allow you to.
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, before we go on to the agency heads, I have a question for the Permanent Secretary.
For the?
Permanent Secretary.
Sure.
P.S. You sent us on the cover of letter dated 28th September reports from the FLA and MOCA. And I appreciate that the one from MOCA was in a fairly comprehensive format, giving us key statistics over the last 5 years from 2014 up until August this year. But when I compare what you sent from the FLA, I see a matrix called quarterly report, which really gives us no sense of the overall operations of the FLA. And really, you know, PS is contemptuous of the committee. I had expected something to at least contain what a typical annual report of the FLA would contain, so that we could look at not just what happened in the last quarter, based on a matrix of major tasks, but get a sense of the performance of the organization in a strategic way. And just comparing the quality of the two reports, I mean, clearly MOCA understood what was requested of them, but why did you allow this foolishness to come forward from FLA?
Yes.
Okay, well, I would say that usually the committee articulates, the committee, well, it's PAAC or external, internal, will articulate very specifically what they want.
No.
And in this case, that was not set out. So,
from my experience in the other committees, is that latter point you raise usually are matters arising from initial deliberations, but for virtually all the agencies, they set out what their performance is in that particular year, compare it to the previous year, and what their targets are going forward. So it provides a measure as to where they're going. Say in the case of PAAC, it notes expenditure up to that period, whether it's the quarter or the half a year, as against what is budgeted for the rest of the year. So you have a picture where you are relative to where you're seeking to go. And I think in the great part, that's what Member Bunting was alluding to. I too just got a chance to glance through the FLA, and I didn't know what to compare it to. I didn't know where it was going. I just some information just put there. So it was interesting, without any further exchange, Member Bunting, that the same observation came to us. So that is generally the approach in the reports, the original reports, or the reports for each year that a committee comes before us.
Mr. Chair, I'm usually guided by what is asked of us. And I do recall in that particular communication to the ministry, all that was set out in that letter was the terms of reference of the external internal committee, where we are used to appearing to PAAC. This is also a little bit new for us, because I think this is the second time I'm doing this. So, as I said, the terms of reference were set out in the communication, and that was it. But really, in going forward, you know,
and it's not just for the committee, you know, and I always like to repeat this point. appearance before the committee is not just before the members, it's about for the country. So the information that you present here is for the country to get a picture of what the public entities that they provide for are doing and how they're doing it. So,
well, let me just ask, do we have an annual report for the year ending in March available that we could look at, that you could circulate electronically even? Something that
It is
more
available.
It is available.
It is available. We don't have it here, but it's available.
So, while we're sitting, could you perhaps just email it to the clerk so it can be circulated, and it would give us a sort of broader context?
I'm advised that it has not been signed off on us yet. It is available. Let me, Mr. CEO, please respond.
Darling.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the report is not ready as the Auditor General's report has not been completed as yet. But as it relates to the FLA's performance report, that is ready. But the complete report, which would include the Auditor General's report, to be sent to the ministry, that has not yet been done.
When you say auditor, you're talking the financial audit?
Yes.
So that's not complete for the 17, 18 year?
No, it's not done. In fact, remember, the report for 2016-17 was just completed.
Okay, so you could send us the 2016-17 report,
right,
as well as the
performance
section of the 2017-18 report with the first 6 months of 2018 as well, in terms of the performance statistics. And we will await the financial audit for the 2017-18. I think that would be a good background information. In fact, if you could give us that performance going back over the last 5 years in the same way that MOCA has given us their statistics, I think that would be very helpful.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that is ready and can be provided.
Okay. All right. We want to start with you, Mr. Darling. That is FLA. We're going to give you the opportunity to make our opening statement, yes, and then we will, members. No, I'm not requiring you to. I'm giving you the opportunity to make that opening statement if you so wish to. Okay.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd prefer the questions from the members directly.
Well, let me retract. Let me modify my thing then. I'm going to invite you to give us an overview of your activities, yes, over at least the past. In the report, Member Bunting asked for go back to the next 5 years. But if you could have started for the last year or two,
yes,
last year, give us an overview in a generalized way, performance-wise, financial, though there are another committee that deals specifically with your financial performance, mm-hmm, namely the PAAC. Where you would give us more your performance, then that will help.
Right. Okay. The FLA consists of 7 departments and 2 regional offices, one in Montego Bay and one in Mandeville. And we're looking to open a new location in Ocherius. We are staffed with approximately 150 persons, covering areas such as applications, finance, corporate planning, investigations, compliance and enforcement, and IT. We have embarked, Mr. Chairman, on a comprehensive drive for compliance as it relates to firearm usage and accountability as it relates to ammunition. We found that license holders amounting to over 5,000 persons were not renewing their firearm licenses as required by law annually. There was no account of these persons or their firearms for years, some dating as far as 14 years, even before the inception of the FLA, which means, Mr. Chairman, that when the system was handed over to the FLA, some of those persons who had licenses from the police days when the police was in charge of the issuance of licenses never came into the FLA to regularize themselves with the authority or to renew their licenses. We worked along with the police and the ministry to track some of these persons and to go on an island-wide drive to locate them. The first phase was an enforcement drive to give persons the opportunity to come in without having prosecution done. Over 1,000 persons came in and regularized their firearm licenses and registered on the system. We were able to capture the ballistic signature of those firearms, and persons paid the outstanding duties. We collected over $50 million from June 2017 to December 2017 from that drive. We have implemented measures for persons to account for ammunition being purchased at all dealers, ranges, and the usage thereof at the ranges. We found that importation of ammunition in some years went up to as much as 17 million. Importation. And it became of concern in terms of tracking the usage of this amount of ammunition. We therefore implemented measures where individuals must now account for the purchase and also the usage of that ammunition before any additional ammunition can be issued to those persons. There has been stringent audits of all ranges, dealers, and as stated before, license holders themselves must be responsible to give account of their own firearm and ammunition. We have embarked upon a drive to educate persons about the safe use and handling of firearms, as we have found that many persons are reporting firearms lost or stolen. Lost usually left in a car or in a home, stolen because persons are overseas and left the firearms at home when they ought to have been left with the FLA, and persons would enter the homes and break into them and take the firearms. So we have found an increase in that in terms of licensed firearms.
Just a clarification.
Yes.
When it's stolen from the home or the car, you call that lost as opposed to stolen? I mean, it would seem to me those are also stolen.
No, that's stolen, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so these are different categories of stolen.
Yes.
Some persons are held up and robbed.
Robbed, precisely.
Others leave it unattended in a car or a home, and there's a break-in to either the car or the home, and it's stolen.
That, according to report, our persons state that they last left it there but can't find it. So it would have been, in their view, lost since they were never held up or account for a break-in. We found also that many of these persons who are deceased, the relatives never handed over the firearms or maybe never knew where to locate it at the time. We have found that several firearms were left at police stations, and we're retrieving those right across the island, and we're working along with the JCF to do so, and that has been successful. We have now embarked upon a drive to destroy firearms that have been left at the authority for years without the license holders coming to retrieve them. We are also embarking on a move, Mr. Chairman, to revoke the licenses of firearm holders who we have not seen neither the holder nor the firearm for years, and to take steps to locate those persons. Mr. Chairman, for the last year has been challenging for the FLA, given issues of impropriety that have been reported to be taking place at the entity. We have therefore sought to improve the measures at the FLA as it relates to internal strengthening of the procedures and proper documentation of them. We went on a retreat recently to redraft the procedural manual so that we strengthen the procedures and the processes to ensure that what happened at the FLA does not happen again. And as the Permanent Secretary stated, the Firearms Act is being amended and provisions are being made in the legislation for criminal sanctions to be imposed in cases where there are certain impropriety on the part of the administration of the FLA in relation to some matters. As some of those issues were never covered in the legislation, we are now seeking to put certain measures in place within the legislative framework to address some of those issues. Mr. Chairman, as it relates to financial performance, the entity continues to be very buoyant as it relates to its finances. We continue to exceed our performance, notwithstanding delinquency on the side of license holders. Our budgeted targets have been met, and the reports generally from the Auditor General has been fairly good as it relates to the issues. The last report we had, I believe only 5 issues were raised, and there are technical issues having to do with system glitches that we were able to resolve. And so we continue, Mr. Chairman, to work along with the team to strengthen the systems and the programs at the FLA to improve the services that we offer.
Thank you, Mr. Dallin. Before we start, I want to open up for members. But could you just tell us the board of the FLA? Who is the chairman of the board?
Colonel Hardley Carter.
Hartley?
Audley Carter.
Carter, okay.
Carter.
How long now since he has been chairman?
He has been chairman. This is about
roughly what
this
month?
year. About 3 months, 3-4 months, Mr. Chairman.
So you'd say about since July or since June?
It would have been a little before that. It is June. It would have been June, Mr. Chairman. June. Yes.
June 2018.
That's correct.
Before that, who was the chairman?
Miss Ina Rose.
Ina Rose.
That's correct.
And she served up until when?
She served from...
And these were between what period?
She served, I believe, from March 2017 to... Sorry, 2018, sorry, Mr. Chairman. 2018 to June.
To June.
That's correct.
So this was an acting position?
No, Mr. Chairman. It was actually gazetted. She was the chairman. She was the chairman.
So
after Major General Anderson left, she was appointed the chairman.
Was she on the board?
Yes, she was.
That was my next. So she continued to be on the board?
Yes, she continues today.
Okay.
So it was the de facto acting chairman for the 3 months, the interregnum between.
No, not necessarily.
Well, an interim chairman, chairman pro tem. If you
because a short period. That's
well. Mr. Chairman, I received official communication from the ministry, and the gazette was stating that she is the chairman.
Okay, so she was fully appointed as the chairman.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. And before March, up to March, it was
Major General Anderson.
Major General Anderson, and that was from when he started?
I believe it's in October 2017 to March.
To March this year. And before Major Anderson?
Mr. Dennis Wright.
Mr. Dennis Wright. And he was from?
He predates me, Mr. Chairman.
He was?
He predates me.
He predates you?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And you started in?
June 1, 2017.
June 1, 2017.
2017.
Okay, and you are still there, right? So.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay, okay. I note in your overview you have a staff of 150.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
150 employees.
Contract.
Yeah, it's coming there. How many of those are contractors against permanent employment?
All staff members of the FLA are on contract.
All are contract.
All are on contracts.
What's the duration of the contract?
3 years generally.
3 years, and you have a renewable.
It can be renewed, yes.
It can be renewed.
That's correct.
Okay. And the renewal is based up, or non-renewal is based upon performance evaluation.
Several factors.
But every appraisal exercise takes several factors into consideration.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
So when I have asked if it was on performance,
yes.
I would expect in all elements, all yes. pertinent elements,
yes.
performance. Okay. That's why I'm kind of belaboring yes. the point, because performance would bear in mind all the pertinent parameters for the job.
Mr. Darling could tell us what are the factors outside of performance considerations
yes.
outside
that
of
affect there.
Mr. Chairman, outside of performance, we work with our local and international community as it relates to intelligence gathering, and basically assessment and reports that we get from the general community, the farm industry, on persons. We use that. So notwithstanding a performance appraisal, we do look for other things outside of that because of the nature of the security industry and what we do.
All right, we'll come back to that a little later. I want to open up now for members.
I would like to start with my first question. Chairman?
Proceed, yes. Member Darling.
Morning, PS, Mr. Darling,
morning.
Your team. In your opening statement, you rightly indicated that the last year has been very challenging for the FLA. The FLA has been in the media about all kinds of quote corruption, unquote misconduct, etc., etc. My first question to you is related to the gun machine that you found in Mandeville. There was a big story that a gun-making machine was found in Mandeville. I want to know if it has been confirmed that it was a gun-making machine, who determined that it was a gun-making machine, and where is that situation now? Because I think the country was alarmed when the FLA, the authority established by the government to monitor firearm and ammunition, declared publicly that they found this machine. Could you comment on that?
Yes, member.
Chairman, before, may I just seek an intervention here? And firstly, can we determine whether or not the matter is still before the court, and make a determination as to whether it's appropriate for Mr. Darling to answer such a question when it is likely to impact upon the court's decision if the matter remains sub judice?
Question is whether or not the matter is before the court in that particular location, machine, entity. Is it?
It is under active investigation by several agencies, Mr. Chairman.
But it's not before the court?
No, it's not before the court.
Okay. To answer Member Dallas.
Right. Well, Mr. Chairman, the discovery of this machine was actually done when we launched an investigation into activities in Manchester as it relates to purchase and acquisition of excessive or unusually high quantity of ammunition. When we visited the location, it is not the FLA that stated it was a gun-making machine. It was actually the owner of the machine who indicated to the FLA that he had this machine and the capabilities of that machine. And that is when we launched the investigation into this machine and its capability after it was revealed to us by the owner, who is also a licensed firearm holder. And we contacted the other security agencies such as CTOC, MOCA, and alerted them to that. And the investigation is ongoing. Thus far, Mr. Chairman, we have learned that the machine, if properly programmed, can make up to 80% of the component parts of a firearm. The owner of the machine provided certain documentation and certain information as to what he was waiting. He was awaiting from the overseas provider of the machine to be able to use it. In fact, there's a disclaimer or a disclaimer, I would say, that was on the document that if it were to be used for any purpose other than the general use, permission would have to be sought. In terms of, I don't remember the exact wording, but it was more in the line of the use of the machine to create any weapon of this mass. To use, I think the declaration on the documentation was that if it were to be used for any weapon of mass destruction or so, authorization would have to first be sought. But I can check, Mr. Chairman, but there was a declaration also on the documentation for that machine.
Just for my own bit of clarification on that question, you said the machine by the owner of the machine indicated that it was capable of making components for a firearm.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
I take it that the machine was also capable of making components for other purposes as a machine.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. And its current use or intended use, yes, on being imported was for what purpose? Making machine parts generally, or to make firearm component parts?
No, and as I said, Mr. Chairman, the information that was given by the owner was that he was awaiting certain authorization from the Ministry of National Security in order to operationalize the machine.
What, to operationalize it for the purpose of firearm components or for general use as a machine?
Mr. Chairman, I'd have to take the opportunity to look back at his statement to see exactly what he stated.
I only ask the question because machines generally in any engineering facility can make many different things, yeah, that you design. So I just wanted that clarification.
As I said, Mr. Chairman, the investigation started based on the declaration, and it's an investigation. We never reached a conclusion as to whether or not it was imported. We launched an investigation with several agencies, including the Ministry of National Security, to ascertain the facts of this and the circumstances.
Just on this point. No. Just a follow-up on that. Have your investigations revealed that there are several others of this type of machine in Jamaica? In fact, if not the identical model, similar machines would be in any major machine workshop across the island?
As I stated before, member, the investigation is ongoing, and I am not leading the investigation, so I have not seen the final report as yet.
So you haven't bothered to, after making a big song and dance, putting up all kind of tape on Winston Jones Highway, having the gentleman's business on the news as if you use the word discovered this machine. Was it hidden?
Mr. Chairman, as I stated, the FLA's interest was never in the machine. We were carrying out a separate investigation, and the owner indicated to us the nature of this machine and brought us to the machine. We did not broadcast anything in the public domain, right? We really responded to questions asked of us.
Well, I don't know if you didn't broadcast anything, but Winston Jones Highway, as you're aware, Mr. Chairman, is one of the most traversed roads in Jamaica, and there was a whole heap of police and FLA personnel there on this discovery that Mr. Darling, but I suspect he discovered it in the same way Columbus discovered America, disregarding the fact that there were quite a lot of indigenous peoples already living there. But this machine wasn't hidden, and you know, Mr. Chairman, it points to one of the concerns I've had about the sort of alarmist approach that we see coming out of the FLA under Mr. Darling's leadership, where everything is a big song and dance, when a little investigation, certainly not taking the months that this has been out there in the public domain, and I'm surprised that given, you know, the talk in the media, etc., that Mr. Darling has not briefed himself on this investigation before he came here, that a minor investigation, an internet search would have shown that this was not a gun-making machine, that this was a straightforward piece, numerically controlled machine tool that is used in many machine shops, not only in Jamaica, but across the world. And, you know, I think this is symbolic of a type of alarmist approach that Mr. Darling, or the FLA, has taken under Mr. Darling's leadership. But I have my own set of questions, and I will.
Member,
Yes,
you were on the floor.
I wanted just a follow-up, because I know there are a lot of
Green
members who want to. Let me tell you why I asked the question. I understand the pressure and the work of the FLA. But when the country wakes up to hear that, and I don't even know the gentleman here is in Mandeville, that a gun-making machine has been discovered, and it's a crime scene. Police there, as the member Bunting said, tape is all over the place. Something must have led the FLA to this. Your inspection of the location, for whatever reason, a senior officer or inspector would have visited the place and found out that, okay, there's an alarm. And in so doing, you'd have invited your international partners and local partners, including MOCA, etc., etc. And this is big for the country. This is big for security, general security of the nation. And yes, for the reputation of the individual, the reputation of the FLA, etc., etc., etc. And it is not in court, but the investigation is continuing. I don't know if any of your senior officers here is aware of the investigation and can help us with it, because I think it's something that we need to put to rest.
Member Green and the member Anna. And then I will invite you to respond.
Just to be clear, Mr. Danny, on this issue, the investigations are ongoing, are in relation to other agencies as well, outside of the FLA?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Yes, member. MOCA and CTOC are part of those investigations. Yes.
Yeah. And just to be clear on the point made earlier, you say the information was given to you in relation to the capabilities of the machine.
Yes, member.
And you by the owner?
By the owner, because we were carrying out, as I stated before, a separate investigation in Manchester concerning the owner, and it was the owner who relayed this to the investigator and brought the investigator to the machine and gave the investigation certain documentation, and that is what caused us.
So just to be clear, because you know sometimes things are said and it gives the impression that you are the man who actually is there doing the investigation, and you would have an investigator who the information was given to and then passed up the chain.
Yes, member. There's an investigation department,
okay,
which is led by a director of investigation.
Okay.
Investigation.
Okay. So it's not Shane Daly who personally goes and becomes Christopher Columbus?
It is never about me, member.
Just to be clear, that's important.
Anna?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning, everyone. And this is my first committee meeting. Thank you. And my first intervention. The firearms are tools that I stay very far away from. But for some, they're very necessary for different reasons, for birds, for security, and otherwise. In your opening statement, you spoke about some improvements that were undertaken. Tell me what, to avoid certain things is what you said. Tell me what have you avoided, one. Two, tell me what some of the investigations you spoke about have rendered. And three, based on your terms of reference outlined, it seems that you have a tall task to monitor, regulate, issue, appropriate all of these disparate forces around guns. What is the additional staff you need? I saw some cursory information, but those are the three main questions I have so far.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to suggest, Mr. Darling, that you respond to those two questions and then I revert back. You have some more? Three.
Right.
No, both to you and after Green and then revert to Member Darling.
Right. Mr. Chairman, the issues alluded to by me earlier were matters of procedure. The procedure in terms of the handling of applications when received at the FLA and the investigation carried out by the staff member. We found that there were gaps in the quality of the investigation being carried out on applicants. We found that as it relates to procedure, the applications were being moved from one department to the board without going through the CEO's department for vetting before submission to the board, because the CEO is the only staff member who reports to the board. But the process was that it was moving from the investigation department to the board and not being vetted through the executive office to ensure that all the relevant documentation and summary were present before being submitted to the board for decision. That procedure was implemented for greater scrutiny as we received reports as to persons manipulating the process at that stage in terms of being their own decision maker as it relates to whether the person is qualified to receive a firearm at that stage. Also, that reports were being submitted at times to the board without the necessary security clearances being submitted as is required. So that measure...
So that was the process up until you came in June 2017,
yes,
the process you're describing?
Yes, member.
Okay.
And therefore, as a result, that measure was implemented that the file must be brought to the general administration department for vetting to ensure, one, that the security clearances have been received from the relevant agencies, because what we discovered is that the files are sent to the board and a decision is made without necessary security clearance coming in, and after in cases where the licenses have been granted, the security clearance comes in and there are adverse traces on the individual that was never discovered in the field, and it then placed us in an awkward situation in trying to retrieve that firearm from that person and the steps. So those are some of the measures that were implemented. Stricter guidelines as it relates to board administration interaction was also looked at, and steps taken to ensure that there's a clear separation of the roles of the board and the administration as a part of the accountability measure to ensure that there is no correlating necessarily. I said that would, for want of a better word.
Mr.
Yes.
CEO, just tell me how many perhaps breaches you found in the security breach when you arrived. It's important for me to understand. And if you don't have those figures, but if you can just give a range perhaps.
Clarify security breaches for me, please.
Based on what you said in terms of some of the applications bypassing your office at the time and ending up at the board, how many applications would you say breached the protocol before you were able to implement systems that fixed it?
Several, and we are still counting.
Yeah, but several have some indicative numbers.
Tens, hundreds, just a ballpark.
We're over 100.
Over 100, under 200? No, there's some. You must see what you saw.
Mr. Chairman, to be frank with you, the numbers are going up as we go along each day. So yes, each day, Mr. Chairman, we are finding more and more, because what is happening is that the files are being vetted and checks are being made as it relates to, as we said, we are doing a review of our systems to see what went wrong, how, and to improve upon it. And the more we go through, Mr. Chairman, in terms of minuting of the files, updating of the files, we are seeing
more and more.
So
Mr. Chairman, just the follow-up to the same question, what is a specific breach that has really churned your management approach to dealing with this problem, i.e., what has been the specific breach of protocol or the types of breaches that you're seeing coming out of this situation?
Issues of corruption as it relates to persons collecting monies from applicants in terms of preparing of the investigative reports, interference from persons from one department as it relates to also influencing an investigation, interaction with staff members at the board level to influence the application also, and the general breakdown of the procedural guideline that ought to be followed in ensuring, for example, the security clearances being received from the relevant intelligence agencies on the individuals before the licenses are issued. Proper.
No, just again, you use terms, I just want to be clear on what I mean. Interactions with staff members at the board level.
Yes.
So you're saying that board members would be interacting directly with staff of the FLA rather than the CEO, rather than going through the CEO.
We found those cases.
And
yes.
And this system where the CEO's office was bypassed, was this instituted under the Dennis Wright-led board?
Mr. Chairman, I could not answer that because, as I said, they predated me. So I could not speak.
But it would be on the files of the, if you could do some research on when, because it's clear Mr. Darling will have to come back before us. So could you do some research on that issue for me?
Will do, member.
Okay. Member, I know.
Yes.
The other one was about the staff complement.
The staff complement,
Right,
okay.
because I think you've dealt with the investigation
Right.
sufficiently.
We have over 40,000 license holders, 23 dealers, farm dealers, dealers, approximately 11 ranges, almost 100 security companies. 86, right. Security companies that are required to be audited, accountability measures to be implemented as it relates to those persons. Yet we have a department of compliance and enforcement of 9 staff members, including the director, to carry out that task. So the focus has been on the dealers, the range operators, and the security companies in terms of audits being conducted on those, because it's what I would say the easier ones because of the numbers. And so we have been consistent in auditing those and keeping those in check. But as it relates to the over 40,000 license holders, and as I mentioned, the delinquency rate in terms of compliance with the legislative framework to renew on a timely basis and also for the firearm to be inspected and the whereabouts known, the complement is not sufficient to be able to cover what I'd call snap audits on these 42,000 persons.
Just my final question, Chairman. What has happened to the systems/individuals who were found in the breach of the protocols? Are they still with the organization?
Most of them are no longer there, member.
Just in a passing way, the 40,000 license that you refer, how much of that is for security companies and dealers?
Approximately, I'll tell you, 4,560, Mr. Chairman, and 42,000 for
the rest are individuals.
Civilians.
Okay. Well, let me take Member Campbell and then I'll come back to Member Daly. And they were before you.
Thank you, Chairman. As you raise the issue of the licenses to security companies, from what I know, you issue the licenses for the operation of security companies to the principals of these entities. So, if and when the principal moves on, how do you deal with the licenses? Because you have, let's say, 100 firearms which are issued to this individual, the principal of the entity. If anyone were to attempt to carry on that business, he is strictly under the present regime in breach that person would be deemed to be operating with illegal firearms. Mm-hmm. What is it that you're doing to correct that system which is presently operating?
Okay. The license that is granted to an individual is unique to that individual because the person has to give account for the firearms and ammunition that is actually accorded with that license. For security companies, the principal of the company would be the owner and licensee of all the firearm licenses, the firearms in the custody of the company. If the individual should pass, then the rules of law as it relates to company law and the passing of the changeover to the new director and principal would have to be initiated by the company and the board of directors to advise us that this is the new principal and that they're requiring that the firearm that were the possession of the company, because the firearms are usually owned by the company but being held, the license holder being the principal of the company. So the transition takes place upon the company advising us that the principal has passed or no longer requires the license and that they are being transferred to the new person. And the general protocol that is accorded to a new applicant is done.
So you could have a situation then where this new principal, as if you so describe it, would have to wait for a period of 2 years before his business could continue operating.
You could have a situation, Mr. Chairman, member, and what we are doing now is actually we are developing a protocol to facilitate that sort of transaction. We have looked internationally at the legislative framework as it relates to these things, and it is the same principle that accords with ours. And what we are looking at is a protocol for the smooth transitioning of the licenses to the new owner, meaning what we are looking at is actually vetting the directors of the company to ensure that they are fit and proper. So should ownership pass, we could transition to the new person immediately without disrupting the business.
Okay. In this order, Member Brown, Fagan, Bunting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Morning all. CEO Darling, going back to your opening remarks, you referred to drive on a few occasions. And I must commend the FLA on collecting 50 or so mil for the non-renewal. Well needed revenue. But the drive I want to question is the safety drive. The safety drive.
Yes.
Now, the one that you said you have embarked upon, I'm just wondering, isn't this supposed to be a part of the training package? The package that the firearm holder would have gotten before they be armed with the firearm. To ensure that the stolen from persons' home or elsewhere is minimized, or it is just a reinforcement drive that you're on?
It is actually a reinforcement drive, member, because persons before they are issued with a license are required to satisfy the authority that they are competent in the use and handling and understanding of the framework governing the ownership of a firearm. They are required to get certification from a trainer in the safe use and handling and security protocol as it relates to the use, security, storage of the firearm. And therefore, it is really what we would call persons being delinquent or ignoring those rules while we're actually going out on a campaign to remind persons as the authority will be taking a stricter approach as it relates to the issues, because we believe it can affect national security where licensed firearms are being lost or stolen and ending up into what I call the illicit trade.
Member Fagan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Darling, happy to see you.
Same here, Mr. Fagan.
You were once colleagues.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, the matter of firing seemed to follow Mr. Darling to another agency some time ago. He was always in the news of persons being dismissed and so on, and then it moved to another agency, like the FLA. And then we also hear that persons are dismissed regularly and so on. I don't know the truth to it, but can Mr. Darling say what has been the staff turnover at the FLA over the period that he has been since February 2016?
Mr. Chairman,
you just so clear, is it since Mr. Darling been there from June last year?
You can break it into two.
Over the last 2 years.
But I would love to look at 2017.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have those figures with me now, but we'll gladly provide them to the committee if allowed to do so. But we don't have the actual figures right now, Mr. Chairman. And just for clarification, separation of members of the FLA is actually both sides, where persons have moved on to greener pastures and also persons who have been separated from the entity generally.
So when you provide this information,
yes,
the numbers that are turned over, could you also provide in those posts the qualifications of the outgoing persons and those of the incoming persons to these posts as well?
And if I might suggest with that question, what are the qualification requirements of the post?
Will do, Mr. Chairman.
On the same page, Mr. Chairman.
Continue. No, but just a follow-up on that question by both Mr. Fagan and Mr. Bunting. You have been there for about from June until now, a year and a quarter. Okay. What's the turnover rate off the top of it? Some indicative number, how many persons have left? For whatever reason, either voluntary separation or non-renewal of contract, and also termination of contracts, because all of them are contracted. Termination of contract before expiration, and voluntary separation and non-renewal upon expiration of contract.
I would prefer to get the exact figure, but I'm thinking in a ballpark of about 10 persons. But I'd get the actual figures, Mr. Chairman.
Of that 10 that are separated since June when you've been there, those are non-renewals, or those are contracts not that have been terminated before the expiration?
I would prefer to get the documentation before I actually speak on the matter, since I'm speaking publicly on the issue. That I prefer to get the exact numbers rather than to guess at this point, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. But and I appreciate that. Those that you have filled subsequently of that 10, what is the modus operandi of filling those positions? Is it through your advertisements, internally and externally?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And all of those positions have been filled in keeping with those procedures?
Mr. Chairman, I'll get back to you on all of that in terms of the procedure, but generally the posts are advertised internally, then externally, and persons are interviewed, and the panel is usually 3 persons constituting the panel. From the FLA.
Okay. Board or management?
Management. The board is never involved in interviewing except for the CEO. The CEO is the only person that the board employs.
Mr. Chairman, just a follow-up. Okay. I'd like to find out if there are any of those persons employed on secondment from any ministry or organization. Because I know after a captain person, I'm not sure if he's seconded from the army, or can you say?
I am not clear on that, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
You want to?
Mr. Chairman.
Is that a point of order?
Mr. Chairman.
No, he's in the middle of a question, so I want to know if it's a point of order before I come to you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Could you raise the point of order?
I realize, Mr. Chairman, that it is going one way where the questions are concerned. I have indicated to you at least 5 questions down the road, and you passed me by with you, Mr. Chairman, asking the majority of the questions. I did, and he looked at me. But, Mr. Chairman, again, sir, I am waiting on your.
No, I have a list here now, Mr. Clark, and you're on the list. But you're not seeing the people behind you who put their hands up. I'm seeing everybody. So you don't necessarily know where on the line you fall.
But Chair, I don't want to call it a point of order just because I want to raise an issue. But I'll ask for your clarification, because I'm very wary about questions such as indicating that somebody may be on secondment, and if that person is at the ministry. And no, Chair, I am trying to get, Chair, what would be the purpose in the scope of the committee. Chair, that's why I asked the chairman of the committee to indicate, Chair, in the purpose of what we are doing and what we've invited the FLA for. I'm wondering what would be the purpose of asking about whether somebody's on secondment or not.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about engagement of staff, and each member, including yourself and myself, in an attempt to get clarity on the practices that are engaged, is free to ask any question that they believe might help to clarify that understanding that they need a clarification of. And I know you'll do the same thing too.
Am I next? I didn't get a response. I don't know.
I'm going to turn. No, you were, I wouldn't say interrupted, but you were Yes, and I'm the answer comes. I have member Bunting and I had Mr. Clark, but Mr. Clark, I don't know if his intervention was his question. But let me get the PS intervention here.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to put on the table a reminder that as far back as October 2016, the ministry, in carrying out its own due diligence, had commissioned assessment, basically, of FLA. So from in our own remit for transformation of the ministry and its agencies, that work had started from as far back as October 2016, and one of our own officers had gone to to FLA as a CEO, did an assessment of the systems and processes. So he went on secondment, yeah. I'm being reminded. So I'm just reminding the framework in which a lot of the other activities have taken place since then, you know.
Just to clarify, the person who was doing that assessment was seconded to FLA or has been seconded to somewhere else?
Was seconded to FLA, has left FLA and seconded to somewhere else.
Oh, so the work that he was doing
is finished.
It's finished?
Yes.
And that report resides in FLA?
Yes, and with the ministry too.
Was the report adopted and then sought to be acted on?
That is what the CEO is working through with, yes.
CEO is now, so the report forms part of what informs the FLA's
mandate to move forward in terms of its transformation activities.
Okay.
On that point.
No, on that point.
On the PS point. On the PS's point, just for clarity, the person who was seconded from the ministry to the FLA and has been back at the ministry, is he or she among the 10 persons or 12 persons who have been separated, as the CEO has said?
No, that was an independent secondment of the ministry. CEO can't do anything with that person.
No.
What are you asking me?
Understand what I'm saying? Is he or she in the number?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No.
How many persons were? Well, the CEO can reply when in the staff that has gone back to greener pastures or wherever. How many were seconded either from MOCA, JCF, or JDF to you to do some work and have been returned? You don't have to answer now, but when you come to answer.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, I can answer.
Yeah, and at the same time, you can answer the questions from Member Fagan, and then I'll take Bunting. Yes. Member Bunting.
As it relates to the number of persons seconded who have returned, one. As it relates to current secondment, I'm not aware of any current secondment at the moment.
The captain, he just holds the name captain coming from the army.
From the
army.
The what is it? The JDF. Okay, from the cadet, the Jamaica Combined Cadet Force.
Okay.
No, I missed that. You have a cadet captain seconded from the cadets?
No. That's what I'm saying to you, member. There's no secondment, as I'm aware. No, there's no one on secondment. No. But he asked about this person by the name of captain, and I'm saying to it's for the combined cadet force, and not
well, you know,
No,
seconded.
let me just make sure that Member Fagan is clear in the answer, since he asked the question.
It's a little surprised because I didn't realize that the Combined Cadet Force carries the title through there. So I should be called lieutenant. I was cadet. I was at the Homo Technical High School that we attended.
Maybe you can move a motion in Parliament that
four-star general.
Okay, Member Bunting.
Yeah, just for information, I recall when General Saunders was PS, he wrote to a number of these persons who use cadet titles, informing them that that is totally inappropriate. The retired military officers can carry their rank into retirement, like, I don't know if Colonel Edwards is retired or seconded, but certainly not a colonel or captain of the cadet can use that title. It's against the military protocol. I mean, you can correct me if I'm, yeah, I think Colonel Edwards is confirming that that is, you know,
to be detained with titles this morning. Right?
But anyway, Mr. Chairman, I hope as a, you know, as someone who has a lot of first-hand experience here, you'll give me some leeway, because I have a series of questions. But first, I just really want to correct some things that were made in the statements that were made in the opening introduction by Mr. Darling. You know, he used terms like, we are embarking on a drive to audit the firearms at police stations. This is something that was taking place from Dwight Nelson's time as minister. I came there and found audits of police stations going on. There was a combined team from the Ministry of National Security, Internal Audit, the JCF, and the FLA doing these audits, removing the firearms to the FLA, and further, the destruction of firearms is something that has been taking place routinely. You have not introduced these things to the FLA, Mr. Darling. These were taking place even from before my time as minister, going back to Dwight Nelson's time at least. The things like you talk about a safe use and handling framework, this was approved and implemented from my time I was as minister. So these are not new things that are being introduced. I mean, I know you want to burnish your credentials, but certainly these were things taking place routinely. But I want to come now to we've already asked for a number of things, Mr. Chairman, in terms of the organizational structure. So in fact, we asked it about the staff and the turnover and giving us information about turnover, but I think we need to look at the organizational structure as well so we can see the relevance of the positions that are turning over. I heard Mr. Darling use the term compliance and enforcement department. Is this related to what used to be the audit and compliance? Is it a new name for what was, or are there two different departments?
That is correct. It's one and the same department. The name was changed, Mr. Chairman, member, recently.
Okay, but you will give us an organizational structure that will show the departments and the posts on the establishment.
We would.
The report that the PS, I have two questions for the PS, which I'll start with those. This assessment of systems and protocol report, PS, that the ministry commissioned and has. Can you share copies of that report with the committee? And second, we learned through the media of a review panel that Minister Montague had instituted, for which there is no provision in law, but he apparently instituted this new mechanism. So you had the Firearm Licensing Authority, then you had the Review Board, both of which are established in law under the Firearms Act. But the minister seemed to rely on this review panel to assist him in coming to a decision on appeals. Could you, PS, give us the terms of reference of this panel and who are the members of this panel? And if it is still operational, and if not, over what period was it operational? Now to come back to the, okay, go ahead.
I have a couple of follow-up.
Yes, so traditionally, you would know also, member, the ministry provides administrative support to the minister when reviewing the appeals. and the minister himself makes the decisions on these appeals. So I'm not responsible for how a minister or former minister describes the administrative support, but it is the administrative support that has always been provided, that is continues to be provided. In other words, there's no TOR. The Protective Security Division collects the information that comes in from the FLA and puts it together and provides it to the minister, who makes a decision.
Could you no, I'm a little bit lost.
So that is what I would, that's
No.
how that is the administrative support.
What I'm understanding Member Bunting was alluding to is that there is an appeal stroke review tribunal set up in the FLA and under the FLA Act, and those on the Firearms Act. That's one. The point Member Bunting alluding to is that in the media, the former minister indicated that he assembled a team of persons, including a lawyer, I remember in the meeting, to review those declined applications by the FLA. And by the FLA is understood the structures, including the review body of the FLA, would have declined. Because the first order of business, if you apply to the administrative leadership and they decline you, you can make an appeal to this appeals tribunal. It was denied, or some cases were denied there. The minister then established this advisory body, review panel, that advised him that cause his action to be taken to grant the application for the permit. What I was not too clear on, PS, is that, or you're saying that that body of persons that the minister engage is outside of your remit, you don't know about them?
No, I'm saying that traditionally it is administrative support that is provided. So those bodies would have been, yes, within the protective security unit of the ministry. Okay. And they provide the information on file as to each of case by case. Whether they sit together or they sit one-on-one with the minister, that is an administrative support being provided. There is no formal
Mr. Chairman, if you'd allow me, I need your help on this. The administrative arrangements you are describing are exactly the administrative arrangements that were there when I was minister and you were permanent secretary.
We were together for 6 months. Yes.
Right, and I'm saying what you have just described about the departments within the ministry, the head office ministry, that supported the minister. I think it was called the Protective Services Division,
Protective Service Security Unit, yes.
Protective Security Unit, the legal services. That is not a review panel. So what the PS is saying is that the review panel is a linguistic fiction. That is what, because there was no review panel when I was there, and what she has described is precisely the support that a minister gets from the head office ministry. He has legal department, he has the protective services division that aggregates the information on the file and summarizes it and keeps it going through the system. That is not a review panel. So what the PS has clearly said today is that review panel is a pure linguistic fiction. There no such thing exists.
Well, she might not have used those words. That is your interpretation.
That's what he should say.
No, that's why I intervened, Mr. Green, to clarify that is the members' assessment.
But I don't know what other assessment there could be. But anyway, we will. Can I move on now to my questions for Mr. Darling? You mentioned that since about June, you said the chairman is Colonel Audley Carter, the chairman of the FLA.
That's correct, ma'am.
And this is the same Audley Carter that was it director or exec CEO of the Jamaica Rifle Association.
The terminology, I believe, would be president
of the Jamaica Rifle Association.
That's correct, member.
Which is one of the, operates one of the ranges supervised by the, regulated by the FLA.
That's correct.
Okay, so I seem to recall, and you may need to do some research on this, but that there was a conflict which actually went to court between the GRA when Colonel Carter was there and one of the ranges, I believe the same range, the range that you speak of in Manchester, or dealer range, I can't remember whether it was under the dealership or the range, which was resolved, if my mind, serves me, if my memory serves me correctly, in favor of the Manchester dealer. Now, he then moves from the GRA to chair the FLA, and within a short period of time, those licenses are suspended.
Member, I'm not aware of that court case you refer to. And,
okay, well, you could do some research. When you come back, just right. Research that and see if my mind, right. If my memory serves me correctly. You spoke of a number of gaps.
Yes.
We read or we heard about an incident in Negril some months ago. I think it was 2 or 3 months ago. Yeah. Of somebody who was fatally shot in an incident. And that incident is before the court. And I'm not dealing with that incident at all. But subsequent to that, or what it triggered, was information that later came out in the media, which you confirmed, that this person obtained their firearm, the deceased obtained their firearm using fraudulent documentation. What? Is that correct?
Yes, member.
The one who was shot? Who died?
Yes. You've now had 2 or 3 months to do your investigation. Can you give us an update on that matter? Not on nothing to do with what is before the court, no. Just in terms of how that person came to be able to get the licensed firearm, and when did this occur?
Chair.
And what were the weaknesses in the system that allowed it to?
Chair, I would caution, even if that is to be dealt with, just because it involves a matter which is before the court, even though that person is deceased.
This matter is not before the court.
The circumstances that have been raised, even in the public, put a number of legal issues into question, and these matters may arise in the case. And I would say, Chairman, that we should not tread it here. If we are to have those discussions, it will be better if we have it in camera. To be honest, it's not. They're not discussions that I would suggest that the committee traverse.
I don't think. Well, my opinion.
What we're talking about here is the process by which this person came to obtain a licensed firearm, and which Mr. Darling has already acknowledged was it was a fraud. He committed a fraud. And that is what we're asking about, and how it impacts the processes and systems, and exposes weaknesses in the systems at FLA, which is under the purview of this. And I don't think that affects what happened on the night in question in the grill that led to the fatality.
Once that information comes out in the public arena, we certainly may have people who, listening to what is communicated.
But I assume whatever loopholes would long have been closed. This was 3 months ago.
We'd want to avoid.
Again, Chair, I'll urge on the side of call.
Chair, you have to rule on this.
So
Mr. Darling is an attorney. I'm sure he will know how to respond without giving anything that would impact the current case. We're talking about what happened prior to June 1, 2017, when he came to office. This is something that happened earlier in the year, I understand. So his investigation would at least have told him what were the weaknesses or how we came to end up with this gentleman using, for example, I understand, and this was in the media, a fraudulent birth certificate.
Chairman, I'm going to urge caution for the reason that it may compromise individuals who may have given information to MOCA and all the other agencies.
Well, Mr. Darling will be so guided, given his own expert legal background.
No, but Chair, I'll just say again, and I absolutely am unaware of the circumstances that the member has raised, and the report may have missed me. But again, in formulating a defense in a criminal matter, a number of things may arise. Especially what I am aware of is the circumstances under which it is said that the matter happened. I would say, Chair, we should not traverse anything that speaks to the deceased, how he operated before, what criminal act he may have undertaken, because, again, you do not know what a criminal lawyer is going to use in the preparation of his case. It's a criminal matter. I would say if we are to take it in camera.
And while we are not on camera, Mr. Darling, I rely on you not to make any responses that will compromise that proceeding.
Mr. Chairman, I'll answer by saying that there's an investigation ongoing that we have asked MOCA to assist in, and it's actually ongoing as it relates to that in regards to our processes also.
Mr. Darling, the question asked earlier on by, I think, Mr. Bunting regarding that whole review panel. There are about 29 cases altogether that falls in that category that were refused permits and granted by the minister. All such cases, what is the current situation with those? Have they been withdrawn? Are those 29 persons still in possession of their permits, excluding whoever might voluntarily surrender their permit? What is the status of that?
Mr. Chairman, as it relates to the grant, approval, revocation or suspension of any firearm license, that resides with the board of the authority, not the CEO. As it relates to review, which is referred to as the appeal, that actually resides with the review board, which reports to the minister, and is not controlled or reported by the CEO. So as it relates to control of those licenses.
Let me clarify what I'm trying to get. The 29 cases,
yes.
My understanding is that they were declined initially by the review panel within the FLA, correct?
Mr. Chairman, the review board reports to the minister in that it, not to the FLA in and of itself in terms of the CEO and the administration.
All right, let me rephrase
ministry itself.
Let me rephrase it to try to convey what I have in mind.
Yes.
Those 29 cases, 29 persons applied, and their application was declined, and they subsequently made this appeal to the minister, who granted the permits. Is that correct?
The minister would give his directives
for the permits.
For directives as to what the outcome of the appeal, whether he's has allowed the appeal, which would mean directing the FLA to issue the licenses.
No, but what you're just already saying is that the minister would have instructed for the appeal to proceed by those 29 persons.
No, Mr. Chairman. What happens is that once the board of the FLA takes a decision to either deny or revoke a license, the individual has an opportunity to appeal to the appeal panel, which is referred to as the review board.
Yes.
No, it's different. The two different boards. No, the review board is in the panel. Yes, that's the one I'm referring to the one in law, Mr. Chairman.
There's a review board, and then there's a quasi team that the minister, that Mr. Bunting
well, I'm not aware of that.
Described.
Well, I'm not.
A review panel, which is different from the review board, which is part of the FLA.
From Mr. Chairman, from my knowledge, there is a board of the FLA that considers licenses, applications for licenses.
Use the term
and
authority, so we don't.
Right, the FLA. Let me use the FLA. And
FLA
from the FLA, from the FLA, any individual aggrieved by the decision of the authority in denying or revoking his license can appeal to what the law refers to as a review board. Okay. That review board reports directly to the minister. Correct. Because prior to the review board, the appeal was to the minister. So the review board was established to hear the review and give its recommendations to the minister, and the minister would thereafter give direction to the FLA.
Okay.
Yeah, perhaps the PS could speak to that, since it's that part is in the ministry, not in the FLA. But remember, I hadn't finished my question.
Yeah. So. No, but just before you go, because I must be honest with you, I'm a little bit. Those 29 cases of either persons who applied for permits or persons who had permits and they were revoked. What I want to know, those 29 persons, as of today, do they have a permit or don't have a permit?
Mr. Chairman, I heard of the 29 in the media. There are hundreds of appeal cases that have gone to the review board and decisions have been made. This unique 29, for me, we have not been able to find these 29 in and of itself because there are hundreds of appeal cases.
So you don't know who make up that 29 list?
No, Mr. Chairman, because, Mr. Chairman...
So who invented this 29?
Well, I can't speak to that, Mr. Chairman. What I can speak to is that there are hundreds of appeal cases that have gone to the ministry or the minister, and decisions have been made on them, and that I can speak to those, but I can't speak to A29.
Okay. Well, you say hundreds went to the minister?
Over the years, hundreds have gone for an appeal.
Okay. In the answers you're going to be providing for later on, could you say how many within the last 2 years or so that have gone to the minister for review or appeal? Yeah. And secondly, and Madam Pierce, you would have been aware of the statement by the minister for which that 29 was referenced, right? 29 cases. I remember reading that in the media. I find it a little bit not so clear that there are 29 cases that there was concern about that the minister referenced and Mr. Dallin is not aware as to who are the persons who make up that 29, given that if they are permit holders, they would have to be, they are being regulated by you, they are being issued by you. So I find that a little bit.
I could probably help Mr. Darling. And in terms of the information that would be provided, it would be a combination of the PS and the FLA that would have to provide it, because I think the 29 referred to cases where the FLA had turned down the applicant or revoked an applicant's license. They had appealed, that individual had appealed to the review board established under law. They supported the position of the FLA that the person should not have a firearm, a licensed firearm. And those 29 cases were overturned by the minister. In other words, or let me say, the minister's decision was not consistent with the advice he got from the review board. So that would separate. That's how you would sift out the 29 from the hundreds that would go forward, in any given year.
That is the 29 I'm interested in. And the reason, Mr. Darling, that I'm interested in that 29 as against the over 100 that you made mention of is that it was said that there was some adverse trace associated with those cases, which in any layman's thinking would be disqualifying elements for holding a permit. And because of that claim made, I want to be satisfied that you, as the CEO, are satisfied that the persons that your entity gives a permit to is duly qualified to hold such permits.
Mr. Chairman, in going through, as I stated before, the review board does not report to the FLA, it reports to the ministry and the minister. As it relates to its recommendation, the appeal is sent to the review board and its decision communicated to the minister, not to the FLA. The minister's final decision is communicated to the FLA. In order to go through that, we'd be going through hundreds of appeal cases, and we'd have to find in each case, one, the recommendation made by the review board in that case, and the decision made by the minister and communicated to the FLA in that case. So we'd have to sieve through every single one to find, one, what was the recommendation made from the review board on each, and what was the letter coming from the minister on each case to decipher.
But I believe Minister Chang announced that that review was taking place. So those files are either at the ministry or at the FLA. So one or the other or a combination can produce that data.
Mr. Darling, I'm trying to simplify and to understand the thing properly. If somebody applies and they get through, then everything is done. That's it. Now, the persons who never got their permit and then appealed to the minister, through the board as I mentioned, but they would have made their appeal. The minister intervenes, and the minister can intervene to say, grant this permit, he supports granting the permit, or he supports the non-revocation of an existing permit. My question specifically, you say you can't remember about which of those made up the list make up the 29. Over the past period that you have been there since June, how many cases came back to you to say, grant from the minister, because you now have to take the ball there, grant the permit or don't revoke the permit?
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I would have to check to see how many of those correspondence actually came back from the minister to direct the board. So it's actually a letter from the minister to the FLA.
But I'm not even sure Mr. Darling would necessarily know what the review board had advised. So it's not, I don't think, in fairness to him, he can prepare that on his own. I think really, from it leaves the FLA and there's an appeal, it's really the ministry that can provide that data.
No, he had said earlier on that if the minister acted upon the advice that you would have gotten in a particular way, that instruction would come from the minister to the FLA. That's what I thought I heard you say.
Yes, but what you're asking for is a 29 to identify a 29.
No, I go beyond the 29.
Okay. Decisions general.
Yeah, how many instructions came from the minister in respect to granting of those permits that were refused or the non-revocation of an existing permit for which the board would have been seeking to revoke?
Mr. Chairman, I don't want...
But you're clear on that?
No, but
I'm clear on that, Mr. Chairman.
I think you have to make that request to the permanent secretary, because Mr. Darling is not in a position to provide all the information. He's not seeing all the paperwork because much of it is done in the ministry. in terms of getting the recommendation from the review board and in terms of the decision ultimately of the minister, either to uphold, either to because there's a lot of permutations, The FLA may have denied somebody, but the review board recommends that they get it. That's one case. The FLA may deny, the review board deny, and the minister goes along with the recommendation to deny. That's the second. Now there's the third case, which is what I think you are talking about, of the 29, and this was the famous person A fell into this category, where the FLA denies or revokes, as the case may be. The Firearm Review Board established on a statute upholds and recommends to the minister to uphold that. But the minister, in his own judgment, or taking some other extra statutory advice, then goes against that advice. So there are different, permutations, and I don't think the FLA necessarily will see all the stages in that. So it really would be the ministry that would have to get the Protective Security Division to aggregate that data and bring back. But I think it's an important thing, but I'm just directing you to who can provide it rather than to think.
No, I'll be so guided, but I was making it easier, or the simpler part is that those decisions, action of the minister to grant, that Mr. Dallin said would come to him. It is those particular ones but your point goes a little bit beyond that in terms of what advice.
Let's get a comprehensive picture.
Yes.
But just to
so it would be inclusive. It would be inclusive of what I am seeking.
Yeah.
So that is clear. PS.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to advise that further in support of the discussions here, the 29 cases that we're talking about actually represent an answer that was provided to a question from RJR on the number of cases that were overturned actually by the minister at that time. The reviewed cases that were, so that's where the 29 comes from.
Basically where the minister's decision was not consistent with the review board's recommendation.
So, yeah.
But I still have 3 questions. I don't want you to forget that.
No, I was about to ask you to give them.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I know you have been patiently waiting, Mr. Dall. I only never allowed it because I wanted Mr. Green to
Mr. Darling, you said very definitively nobody on the board or no member of the board is part of the interview panel to employ persons at the FLA. You said that very definitively earlier.
Not since I've been there, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, you're now qualifying it since you've been there. Okay, but are you aware that in, again, the Dennis Wright-led board, which employed you, that apart from interviewing for the CEO, the HR committee head or some member of the board was on the interview panel for every single member of staff employed during that time? If you don't know the answer, please could you review the files and get that information for
I can check,
when you come
Mr.
back.
Chairman. I can check.
There was an interregnum between the resignation of the Dennis Wright-led board and the appointment of the Major General Anderson board of a few months. You recall?
Yes, member.
During that time, I understand you were calling in persons to bring in their firearms, suspending it, revoking it, maybe not in law, but de facto. What powers do you have as CEO to call in people and say surrender your, or let me put it in a request another way. Do you have any powers separate from the powers of the board and acting other than as an agent of the authority? Let me not use board because it's confusing between firearm board and authority. Acting as an agent of the authority, the firearms licensing authority, do you as CEO have any powers at all to make any determination or decision as to issuing license, revoking license, calling in persons to bring in their gun in a sort of de facto suspension of their firearm permit.
Mr. Chairman, first, the CEO is not a member of the board of the FLA and is not involved in the deliberation of the board in terms of the granting or the revocation of licenses. As it relates to administratively, we are the superintendent of all licensed firearm holders, and it is the administrative arm of the entity through its investigation branch, its compliance and enforcement unit, that keeps license holders accountable and in check as it relates to the licenses granted by the board. Where persons are found to be in breach of the terms and conditions of their licenses, it is the remit of the administrative arm to take steps to investigate, prepare file, and to characterize or arrest the issue and make recommendations to the board as to a final decision, as it is clear the remit of the board as provided in the Act. On the
when
matter
you say
of
arrest
revocation,
the issue,
we have never...
Just clarification, arrest the issue. Does that mean arrest the firearm holder? I mean, what specifically? I'm not familiar with this term, arrest the issue.
Mr. Chairman, where the authority receives reports or it has come to its attention that persons are in breach of their firearm license, it is the remit specifically of the Compliance and Enforcement Department to cause an investigation to be carried out. That investigation can include the license holder being called in to have the firearm inspected, a statement taken from the license holder, and the firearm confiscated based on the nature of the report that is being carried out on the individual, while a recommendation is being made to the board as to the final action to be taken as it relates. So we are not suspending or revoking the license. We have the administrative arm of the FLA has no such power, and we have never exercised any such power.
You have the power to confiscate firearms.
Where the license holder, Mr. Chairman, for example, comes in and there's a discharge of the firearm, and there are issues such as the person being competent in the safe use and handling of the firearm, we have confiscated firearms. Where there are serious reports of shootings, use of the firearm in a manner that endangers public safety.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the point here, is this an administrative decision or is it a decision of the authority? The authority in my day used to meet very frequently, weekly, to deal with all the matters. It was almost a semi-executive authority because so many of these types of issues could arise at any time. All I'm trying to get from you is this power to confiscate, to call in and confiscate people's firearms. These are licensed firearm holders. Is it you are interpreting that power to be in the hands of the administrative staff of the FLA and not the JCF or the authority through its members?
A general principle, Mr. Chairman, where it concerns criminal action of any license holder, there is a police investigation as it relates to criminal liability, as it relates to the civil liabilities in terms of accountability to the entity that grants that license to ensure that the license holders remain fit and proper and are adhering to the terms and conditions of the license. It is the responsibility and the remit of the FLA to launch an investigation as it relates to those reports and to take such action as is necessary.
No, please don't keep multiplying words. All I'm asking you, you have interpreted that to give you as the CEO and your staff, independent of the authority itself making a ruling, you have interpreted to give you the power to confiscate a licensed firearm holder's weapons, independent of the JCF or the authority itself, you refer to as the board.
Mr. Chairman,
yes or no? Yes or no?
The remit, Mr. Chairman, the remit of the administrative staff is that given by the board of the authority to carry out the administrative work to report to the board itself to make a final decision.
Mr. Darling, specifically, are you saying, Mr. Bunting's question, that power that you exercise, is it explicitly delegated to the administrative staff?
Mr. Chairman, it is delegated to the administrative staff, not to the administrative staff through the CEO, and this has been taking place for years from the FLA started in 2005. It's not something that has started since I have been the CEO.
Mr.
What
Darling,
has happened?
all I'm asking is yes or no.
It's
I'm
yes,
not
and I
asking
said
if
yes.
you invented it. I'm
No.
just asking if you interpret it to mean that you can independently, without carrying a recommendation and getting the approval of the Firearm Licensing Authority, that you can confiscate a licensed firearm holder's
Mr.
firearm.
Chairman,
That's all
the
I'm asking,
board
yes or
has
no?
delegated that power to the administrative staff because that is what we do, support the board in coming to a final decision. And therefore, the part of the administrative process, the Compliance and Enforcement Department is mandated to carry out that specific action.
I'm not going to get a yes or no. I'll just move to my final question. I'll move to my final question in this round. Mr. Darling, are you aware of the report of an audit of a dealership in Mobay, and that this report identified extensive breaches? And what action have you taken in that? If you are aware of it, what action have you taken in that regard?
You'll have to be more specific, member. There are 3 dealers in Montego Bay that I'm aware, Chairman, and audits are carried out on dealerships every year and reports compiled.
And all of them have identified extensive breaches?
Breaches are identified in all the reports for ranges, dealers, and we address them to the various operators to remedy the breaches that we have found in the audit from time to time.
If I may, well, you want to follow up first and then ask after?
You know, I think Mr. Darling is being evasive. I cannot believe, first of all, that if all 3 dealerships in Mobay had audit reports showing extensive breaches, that they would still all be operating, because that would be negligence on his part. And therefore, he should recognize the one that I am speaking about. Obviously, I don't want to call a name, but if necessary, I can call it and ask him what action he has taken in that regard.
You want to respond? Because I have a follow-up question to Mr. Bunting's question.
Mr. Chairman, it would be imprudent of me to be speaking about a report for which I'm not aware exactly which report the member is speaking of or which dealership he's speaking on. And I would gladly respond if the member would provide it in private.
I'll give him the information in camera,
and I'll
so the next time when he returns, he can respond to it.
I'll gladly do so.
But I have a larger question emanating from that. You do audits regularly, as you indicated.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
All dealers, ranges, etc. When you do your audits and you find breaches, is it the practice that you bring those breaches to the attention of the operator, say a dealer, say a range, specify what corrective steps are required, timeline for those corrections? So that's my first question. Is that what you do?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So is it that any of these operations that you will proceed to close, right, or to cause to discontinue their operation would be as a result of breaches that you have specifically identified, remedy that you have required, and they have not been adhered to?
Mr. Chairman, when the breaches are identified by the Compliance and Enforcement Unit as a result of an audit, a report is compiled, and the breaches are sent to the operator and time given as stated to remedy. If that is not done on a timely basis and there's no response or request for extension of time, we would then go back to see what the status of the the operations, and thereafter we would make a recommendation to the board as to action to be taken as it relates to the continuing operation.
And you're saying that that is what happens across the board?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
For all operators, dealers and range operators?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
So if they happen to close down, it is because they did not adhere to fulfill the requirements that you stipulate?
No, there are several other reasons that persons may be closed down outside of audits, Mr. Chairman. Audits are done regularly just to ensure that accountability is taking place as it relates to the sale, acquisition, importation, and the general tracking of firearms and ammunition. That is what the audit does.
Let me ask you something along that line, Mr. Darling. Say a range is a business, right? A range operation is a business.
It's a shoot, yes.
Like a gun ammunition dealership is a business.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
If outside of the audit there are issues that have come to your attention that would cause you to cause that business to cease, you bring those other issues to the attention of the operator for them to respond to. And I was thinking from a standpoint of natural justice, because if I am an operator and I fulfill everything that would be covered in an audit, and you have other reasons to want to close me down, I would want you to specify what they are, and I get an opportunity to respond to them. My question, therefore, when there are issues that would cause action to be taken against an operator or a dealer outside of those provided in an audit, do you give the operator the opportunity to respond to those concerns that would cause you to act against them?
Mr. Chairman, not only the operators, but even licensed firearm holders, private holders, are given an opportunity to respond to certain allegations before a recommendation or file is complete to send to the board. So the response of the person is usually there, and persons generally come with an attorney to assist them in that process before the file is complete and sent to the board for a final decision.
Mr. Darling.
Couple of questions. You might wish to note them and take back the answers when you come back. If you can answer. Well, how many cases do you have? Have you referred to the MOCA from the FLA for investigation? And how long have they been referred? Have you referred any member of staff who, as you noted, have been issues of corruption, collecting money, etc., etc.? Have you referred any staff member to MOCA for investigation? 2. And I wanted to move to something else now that was in the public space. The 12,000 rounds issue relating to the Mandeville gun club. Was it? The people who've been complaining in the public space about this 12,000 rounds. Could you tell the committee something about it? And where are we with those investigations? What exactly was the issue? I think the country deserves to know from you. Yes. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Darling.
Mr. Chairman, as it relates to referring our staff to MOCA, we have had discussions with MOCA extensively on the operation of the FLA as it relates to staff involvement in some of the activities that MOCA has under investigation. So in that regard, yes, we have been in dialogue and identified interest. In fact, a staff member was actually interviewed by MOCA, maybe more than one, but I'm aware of one who was taken from the office to be interviewed by MOCA as it relates to the...
Interviewed as a suspect or interviewed to assist the investigation?
Mr. Chairman, I would have to defer that to the head of MOCA as it relates to their investigation as it relates to. Mr. Chairman, I will say this, that these issues are very sensitive as it relates to the extent of the investigation and the level of corruption as it relates to national security, and to discuss them in an open manner, Mr. Chairman, I believe may be not in the best interest of national security of this country, Mr. Chairman.
Well, no, I was...
If it,
go ahead.
I yield to you, but
no, go
if
ahead.
you note, Mr. Darling, I didn't ask you to discuss the case. I asked you if members of staff who have been separated or presently are working at the FLA have been referred to MOCA, who has a lot of big cases investigating, for investigation for whatever reason of corruption, of public office, or criminal negligence, or criminal whatever. Have you referred any to MOCA? And if so, can you say how many? I mean, properly referred, you know, I don't mean have a discussion with MOCA. Have they been properly referred to MOCA for investigation?
Mr. Chairman, I'll respond to you in this regard. MOCA launched its own investigation into the operations of the FLA. During those investigations by MOCA, certain things would have been discovered and certain requisitions made of the FLA by MOCA. During those requisitions, there were further correspondence and meetings and discussions with MOCA to what I'd call clarify issues of procedure and systems and involvement of persons in those processes as a part of the investigation by MOCA. For example, to identify procedural breaches as it relates to the involvement of staff members in the process.
So nobody was arrested, is what you're saying?
That would be for MOCA in terms of decision. But from my knowledge, I'm not aware of any staff member who was arrested.
No, if I just want to pick up on the point Mr. Daly made, there's a concern, Mr. Daly, that we have heard about persons being separated from their jobs without any explicit cause. We have in a number of entities contracts being terminated before their completion, before their ending, without cause. You indicated that you do performance evaluation and other criteria that is entered, that is considered. What we, and I in particular, want to find out, I get a sense, because we have seen some very egregious action in other agencies of the state. So the question by Member Daly is, any of these, you refer to 10, for example, roughly, during your tenure, that have been separated. And the interest I have is whether or not any of those 10 have been separated without explicit or documented breach of one sort or the other. Reference was made to cases sent to MOCA. If a case is referred to MOCA, it's because of some suspicion of some ill doing on that person's part. The question by Mr. Daly, any of those cases that have been referred to MOCA because of concern of corruption or any such ill deed, has any charge been made against any of such persons, which would substantiate the basis on which they would need to be separated because of that, those practices on their part?
Mr. Chairman, we found cases where staff members of the entity were signing for packages after the board made its decision to grant a license. That staff member consistently signed for the packages of these applicants. When we called in those applicants and interviewed them, they disclosed to us that they paid monies to third parties to collect their packages, and they collected the packages through a third party, although our records show that a staff had signed out the packages. The rules of the FLA that the license holder or the applicant is the only person authorized to sign for his package. And we found staff members signing out consistently for these packages. And the orders...
No, help me. These packages, what are
they?
The
packages, Mr. Chairman, is that once a decision is made by the authority, a package is prepared for the applicant and is notified that
content of this package.
The package, okay, the package advises the individual of the decision of the authority.
It's a letter. It's a letter.
It's more than a letter. It's a package, and it's a letter, and other documents are in the package.
A letter with supporting documents.
With supporting
telling
documents.
them what
precisely.
Next, what are the next steps.
Precisely, member. And you found that taking place. And a part of the review, we interviewed some of those persons whose packages were collected by staff members, and it was revealed they identified. Some of them were able to identify the individual who they paid the funds to collect their package. That has been shared with MOCA. The staff member information has been shared. The documentation for the signing of those packages were found. We found clear interaction with the member of staff on that and that third party involved, Mr. Chairman. We found cases where incidents of wives reporting abuse by use of the firearm. Yet we found that the wife's firearm was taken and not the abuser. Right? We found several cases where the report...
When you say you found, you're talking about an allegation, or this was a finding in court or some sort of tribunal?
Mr. Chairman, we found where the license holder was before the gun court, and the wife spent weeks in hospital from the abuse, and the reports that the firearm, although it was taken, was returned to the license holder by staff members going into the vault and retrieving the firearm on behalf of the license holder. And that person does not work in the department or the vault area responsible for the retrieval of those firearms.
But Mr. Chairman, I've heard Mr. Darling with these allegations from shortly after he went to FLA as CEO. Why have we not seen persons arrested and charged?
Mr. Chairman, with due respect, that is not my remit. I have handed over that to MOCA, and the head of MOCA is actually here.
So basically you're saying MOCA has been dragging their feet, and
never said that. I am saying no such thing, member.
You've provided, from what you've described, it sounds like open and shut, evidence. So why have these persons not been charged? Anyway, Colonel Edwards can answer that when it's time for
where you had allowed others to... Yes.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, we have been having issues of accountability as it relates to ammunition being purchased by licensed firearm holders. The system that existed prior, Mr. Chairman, that I came to the FLA and found that license holders could go to a range and purchase any amount of ammunition that he or she wants, as long as they had the funds to purchase it. And the system of accountability as it relates to the tracking of those ammunition was very lax. A system was implemented where every single person requiring excess amount of ammunition in excess of their license amount would have to apply and be approved by the FLA. That data would be inputted on the system where we'd be able now to track your consumption, the individual consumption of ammunition. Before that implementation, there was no proper system to track the sale and usage of ammunition. When we implemented that, Mr. Chairman, yes.
So as that I could understand and the public, Just want to be sure. If I shoot at a range, I have a firearm. I normally buy the shots at the range. I take my weapon, but I buy the shots at the range. I would not take the allocated amount of 250 rounds, for example, for a shotgun that I get for the year or for whatever, to the range to use. I would buy because the range would have been authorized to import or whatever and to sell me if I have the money at the range. So are you saying, sir, that I could go to the range, buy any amount of shot, shoot for the entire day at the range, what I have bought there, and go back home?
I am saying, Mr. Chairman, that you could purchase as much ammunition as you want from the range, and the system of accountability in terms of tracking that you are purchasing this amount of ammunition and your usage of it. So, Mr. Chairman, whereas you purchase 1,000 rounds of ammunition, the accountability measure is to account that Mr. Daly purchased that amount of ammunition, and so it can be matched against the stock of the dealer and also the spent casing of the 1,000 rounds to ensure that they were expended. That was not in place. So what we are saying is that those measures were put in place to ensure that we are tracking the purchase and the usage of the ammunition by individuals. So we know who is purchasing, Mr. Chairman. For example, the importation permits of over 17 million. We want to know who, where, and how these ammunitions are being purchased and expended to give a better account, Mr. Chairman, as a part of the sharing of intelligence and information on persons. For example, we found a licensed firearm holder's gun in the possession of one of Jamaica's most notorious criminals. We found a licensed firearm holder's firearm in the possession of one of Jamaica's most notorious criminals when he was killed. Mr. Chairman, the tracking of the ammunition purchase would lend assistance as a part of an intelligence gathering to decipher whether or not persons in the legal trade are assisting persons in the illicit trade. So these measures were implemented to assist the process of tracking of ammunition. And I could go deeper in that in camera, Mr. Chairman, as to what was revealed.
I need a little further clarification, but I'm yielding to you first.
Yes, what I wanted to be clarified was what specifically happened in the Mandeville case that was in the public space. And I raise it because it is a public thing where people are saying we bought these, we were approved by the FLA to buy these ammunition, etc., etc., etc. If you could comment on that. If you can't comment on that for ongoing investigation or security reasons in the public space, I will understand too.
As it relates to the FLA's investigation of that, that is complete. As it relates to the police investigation, that is still ongoing. But suffice to say, Mr. Chairman, that we noticed what we would refer to as an unusually high consumption in that area of the country, and that unusually is taken in comparison to the other areas when extrapolated by the number of firearm holders, active users, and so forth of ammunition. And since the measure was implemented to account for ammunition, we got for the first time a request for 60,000 rounds of ammunition from 5 individuals. We were suspicious of the transaction, and we put measures in place, Mr. Chairman, to track the usage of that amount of ammunition. So we approved it on the basis that we would do further checks on it. The ammunition was requested for a specific purpose, for training for an upcoming competition, and it was stated on the application that it was for that particular competition and where. We did our due diligence with our international partners, and we verified certain information on that. After the competition passed, Mr. Chairman, we followed up with a snap audit of these individuals. And what we found is that over 40,000 rounds of that ammunition was not used. Each person applying for 12,000 to be used for this competition, but only one individual had submitted documentation supporting the expenditure of that amount of ammunition. And strange enough, Mr. Chairman, that one person is the seller, the trainer, and the verifier of the usage of that ammunition. So there was no independent verification. He sold himself, used it on his own location, and signed off on his own usage. So there was no independence of that to verify the usage. All other persons came in short. When we audited and found that excessive amount of ammunition remaining after the event, we asked for supporting documentation for the sale or usage of it. We were provided with sales receipts showing that they were sold to the individuals. We asked for financial transactions showing, because that quantity of ammunition, Mr. Chairman, would equate to approximately 1.3 million to each individual. 12,000 would equate to about 1.3 million to each individual purchase. When we asked for financial transactions to support the sale, because we did get sales receipts showing that they were sold, that was not forthcoming. In fact, the individual stated that they had not purchased the ammunition, but in fact had placed them on credit. We found later, Mr. Chairman, that the said individuals who claimed to have had these ammunition on credit with the supplier was purchasing additional amount of ammunition from the said supplier and paying cash for that ammunition. So it was cause for concern, Mr. Chairman. And when statements were collected from all parties involved, there were statements from the person purchasing that they were in case it coerced to submit documentation in support of the purchase of the ammunition, and also coerced as to the usage of that amount of ammunition, as they had not utilized the amount of ammunition, even stated that they had utilized. We have statements signed by the individuals.
Yes.
Some came with lawyers in giving those statements, and that informed our position, Mr. Chairman.
Members, pause a bit. The time being 1:15, we have 2 minutes to leave the chambers. There are members who have outstanding questions. It is clear that we have to resume. I'm going to suggest, therefore, that we reschedule our next meeting. The possible dates, based upon the booking calendar, would be the earliest would be, if are we all excluding Thursdays? Yeah, we usually do a few in Thursdays to allow those who have constituencies outside of Kingston to go there. We could go for next week. If we go on a Thursday morning, we could go for next week, Thursday the 18th at 10. I'm trying to avoid a longer break for the continuation.
Or retreat, yes.
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 No, Tuesday is booked. The Tuesdays are booked up to the 23rd. So the earliest from now would be, no, Wednesday is booked too. The earliest on a Thursday, outside of tomorrow, Thursday, is the 18th. That's the earliest Thursday. The next earliest day is the 24th, the following week, Wednesday afternoon. No, it's afternoon, it's morning.
Yeah, afternoon. The afternoon PAC will be meeting at 10.
Yeah, it will be in the afternoon. PAC meets in the morning on the Wednesday. So to summarize it, the next earliest is the 17th is booked. Would have to be on the, no, it could be in the afternoon on the 17th. Sexual offenses, no. No, the earliest one would be the morning of the 18th, or Wednesday in the afternoon on the 24th. I would suggest to go for the 18th to avoid undue long. So we were going.
Chair, just to say the 18th wouldn't be convenient for me. Thursdays are a very bad day, Chair.
Thursdays are bad for me too, but I give supremacy to the
Parliament.
Parliament.
But some of us are further afield, Chair. So when it's very difficult. Some of us have to travel significant distance.
No, well, I know, to be honest with you, over the years, everybody, when you go beyond Wednesday, everybody is never on. So we usually try to get a majority consent.
I would suggest
Thursdays always
the 24th, the Wednesday. Yeah, all right with that.
Now we hear from the PS.
May I contribute to this scheduling as well?
Sure, you're part of the
we have a national security retreat next week to help inform our budget. So between the 18th and the 20th, we will all be.
All right, to accommodate the PS, could we just agree on the 24th then? 24th in the afternoon, PSC meets in the morning. So at 2 on Wednesday, the 24th of October. I'm going to, pardon me members, but I'm constrained with the time to bring the questions to an end now.
Mr. Chairman, this is not a question.
Do you have but you're not taking any more questions?
No, the time doesn't.
This is not a question. This is just trying to make our work as efficient as possible. A number of persons made requests around the HR area.
Yes.
And I don't want anything to, if I was Mr. Darling and it's coming at me from all directions, I might miss some of what was requested. Could we do some kind of summary of it just to ensure that we don't come next meeting and Mr. Darling tells us that he would have to go and check on these things? So in particular around the HR, we had asked about the turnover since February 2016. If he wants to break it into 2 periods prior to June 2017 when he joined, and after, that's fine. The qualifications, the qualifications for those posts, that's required by the organization. The qualifications of the persons who were there in February 2017 as against those who are there now. All those were required, and I think could be put in a matrix. The posts, the turnover of the posts, etc.
Yeah, just one little modification I'll suggest, Member Bunty. Not just the qualification now, but the qualification when they entered, because some would then acquire it while on the job, but which would be the basis of what they have we give them. But just to tell members what is normally the case, after the meeting, the secretary will go through all that was said, and they will formulate a list of questions coming out of the meeting and send it to the ministry for them to provide a response to. So those are being documented by the staff and will be submitted so that we can, and we usually try to get it in a couple of days or so before, at least by soft copy. And if we meet in the house during that period, the staff usually circulate the hard copies before the meetings. So, Madam PS, we will accommodate your schedule, and we're confirming for the 24th at 2 p.m. and we will resume. Mr. Colonel Edwards, as you see, we did not get a chance to go specifically to you, but there's a lot of overlapping issues, and when we come to MOCA, we will ask you to respond to some of those. Well, yes. But again, and I hope Member Green et al. Will not find a difficulty that since the questions are going to be given by each member, they just send them to the secretary, and she incorporates, because it's not decision, these are questions.
Yeah. But Chair, I would,
1 second, Member Darling.
I would suggest, and I took guidance from the PS when she started. I do believe that that's the better approach in relation to indicating why you're asking specifically persons to come and not leaving it so general, because I think that is where we get into time wasting, quite frankly. I see a lot of questions were in relation to Manchester today and HR. Maybe if we had so directed before, then we could have gotten through the FLA, since it appears that that is the real gravamen of the inquiry into the FLA, what happens in Manchester and what happens in HR. So I would suggest here that, as is done with other committees, that when we're inviting our agencies to come, so that we are more efficient, and that goes back to my first point, that's why we should have agreement on these things. So as we are more efficient, we decide on the issues that we want them to address, because they're like a MOCA, the amount of investigations I would expect that they have under consideration. It can't be just come up and something comes up and we say, what is MOCA doing in that? It can't work like that, Chair.
Well, notice taken, Member Green, but I will tell you from my being, out of the discussion, other issues will arise, and members would want to get clarification on them.
Any other questions that didn't get a chance to be asked here, they could send them ahead of time?
I'm saying one in general, Chair, that our approach should be, when we've agreed to decide agencies, that we indicate more specifically the areas we would love them to address.
Yes. Yeah, there's no dispute about
and
that.
then clearly other issues may arise when they come. Yeah. But I think we would have been able to move much with much more alacrity.
Okay. All right.
And may I ask, on behalf of the hardworking staff of FLA and any of these agencies...
members, could I allow... I want to hear Member Leslie.
We have brought at least 6 members of the FLA, and we're focused on energy solely on... Is it that we don't need the other part? Because they...
No, they are supporting staff. The practice, Member Campbell, let me tell you, the CEO and the PS will come. But invariably questions they might not be able to provide full details, and their support staff assist them. And we don't like to put the CEO on the spot without the necessary support that they will need.
The difficulty I'm having, we come here, and I must confess, I don't know what the terms, what the inquiry, what is it that we're seeking after? Because I would want to know, we have to file a report at the end of the session. And I am not certain what it is that we are inquiring into, so that we can make a report to the Parliament. And so that I don't even know what is it the question is supposed to be focusing on. The questions are just, so wide.
As you will recall, at the beginning, we made a point about the report, the background that was not tabled in the case of the FLA. Number 2, we gave the opportunity to the CEO to give a broad overview in the absence of any detailed report on the operations. And the questions then emanating was on the operations, to see how effective, how successful the entity is, what are the impediments that it is experiencing to allow it to fulfill its mandate.
In the specific standing order, and I think what we were focusing on is on paragraph 3, and I'm having a difficulty really crafting the questions to determine the answer which we ultimately have to decide on, so that we can report back to the Parliament.
Okay, noted. And a number of questions have been carved and answers provided, and no doubt those will help to inform the recommendations that we will make.
In answer to which specific set of questions?
Those operational questions. You see, well, I don't want to restart the discussion because time doesn't permit it now. But we can resume it when we resume our sitting.
But Mr. Chairman, just to remind what the standing orders mandate, 73B subsection C, examining matters relating to national security and the administration of justice and making recommendations.
The member is quite familiar with that. We have a long discussion on that.
Examining matters relating to national security. You couldn't want a wider ambit than that. So don't try and muzzle us. Don't try and constrain us. We will use our discretion in providing oversight of the executive on behalf of the people of Jamaica.
Not the executive, and the member should stop saying
to
that.
do no such thing, and you're not a man who can be easily muzzled.
Just in closing, Member Green,
Manchester.
Member Green, the administrative arm of government execute on the instruction of the executive of the country. They are the operational arm of the executive. Parliament performs an oversight function of the executive. Members, I now move that the meeting be adjourned until October the 24th at 2 p.m.
What happened, Tristan?